We're going into our next chapter, which is Amphibia. Okay, remember this is still under the phylum Chordata. Okay, so now we're going into Amphibia, which are all, for the most part, organisms that you are fairly familiar with. Always their name meaning, just like we had pore-bearing, porifera, stinging, Fernidaria, etc. Um, their name meaning is double life, right? Amphi means both, bio, like biology, the study of life. And that's because amphibians live most of the time, half their life in water and half of their life on land. Once we go through the chapter a little bit farther, you'll see, the changes that happen, the metamorphosis that they go through, where their body transitions to a marine organism to a terrestrial organism. Again, organisms you're probably familiar with: frogs, toads, salamanders, and caecilians. Caecilians you're probably not familiar with. They look kind of like earthworms or snakes, but they're actually amphibians. Most of these have this like moist or scaly skin, not like a reptile, a little bit different. Three-chambered heart, and a slew of other characteristics that all amphibians have. Most importantly, they all have a backbone. 8,500 current species that we know of at this point. You'll find these guys most of the time in fresh water, sometimes on land as long as it is a moist environment. Think like rainforest. You're probably not going to find these guys in the desert, right? Their skin needs to be very moist and wet, and many of them require water for mating and laying their eggs. Okay, a lot of times amphibians go back to the water to lay their eggs because as juveniles they spend most of their time in the water. Never going to find them in Greenland. Okay, that means they don't like cold weather. Okay, they are ectothermic or cold-blooded, the opposite of us, right? When we are cold, our body starts to shiver. That's your muscles contracting really quickly to heat up your body temperature on its own to adapt to their environment. When it's really hot out, we start sweating to cool our body off. That is something that we do automatically without thinking about it. That's what our body is adapted to do. These guys, if it's cold outside, their internal body is too cold. If it's too hot outside, they overheat, etc. So their body is strictly dependent upon the temperature of the environment. Many times in cold weather, when it does get a little bit below the threshold that they're comfortable with, they will hibernate or just move out of the area. These guys are the first vertebrates to live on land. So technically they migrated out of the water and start living on land as the first tetrapods. Tetrapods means that they have 4 limbs and can live on land. The only one in our group, remember there's always an exception to the rule in zoology, caecilians. Okay, those are that weird snake-looking thing we haven't talked about yet. They don't have 4 limbs, but they're still considered tetrapods because of other reasons, more embryonic and development like. These guys have that moist scaleless skin so that they can breathe through it, okay? They have little mucus glands that keep their skin moist. A lot of times they have toxins to ward off predators. The golden poison frog is extremely deadly, enough to kill 10 humans with the neurotoxin that is secreted from their tiny little bodies, okay? So most of the time, they're going to be that wet, slimy feeling, except for some. Okay, so their skin colors can be all over the place. Some are going to camouflage to their habitat. So if you're living in a muddy, rocky area, you're going to look more like the frog or the toad on the left. And then if you are in a rainforest with a bunch of different colored flowers to blend in, you might look like the one on the right. Also, if you look like the one on the right, any bright color patterns usually is a giveaway. Don't touch me, I'm toxic. You don't want to come near me. Okay, so we talked about camouflage, right? Some actually have chromatophores. Where have you heard that before? That would be from our mollusk chapter when we talked about our octopus using the chromatophores to blend in or camouflage to their environment. These guys also do that, more temperature related though. They're not doing it necessarily to camouflage, but instead to allow heat absorption into their body so that they can stay warm, or to lessen the amount of pigment so that they can stay cool. So the darker the color, the more warm they can get. They can absorb more heat from the sun. The lighter they are, the cooler they are. Think about if you're going to go outside in the middle of July at the beach and you're going to wear a black hoodie or a white shirt. Okay, if you're wearing a white shirt, you're not going to be as hot as if you're wearing a black shirt. All right, we can break down Amphibia into three different orders: Anura, Caudata, and Apoda, not Chordata, Caudata. These are your frogs and toads. This is the majority of all of our amphibians we're very familiar with. An means without, ura means tail. So these guys, when they are adults, don't have a tail. As juveniles, they will, as tadpoles, which we'll see when we go through reproduction. These guys have long muscular hind legs for jumping. Okay, we've seen a frog hop away from us. That is their main mode of movement, right? They're not going to be walking on their hind legs. Instead, they use those big, long back legs to push off the ground. Between frogs and toads. This is something that people kind of get mixed up all the time. Frogs are going to be more aquatic, so marine environment or freshwater environment. Toads you're going to see on land, still in moist, wet areas, but you're not going to see them in the water as much. Frogs have that smooth, slimy skin, where toads have a dry, bumpy skin. Not dry completely. They still have mucus glands that help, keep their body moist, but they're not going to be as slimy as our frogs. And then if you look at the leg length between frogs and toads, frogs have much, much longer hind legs. They can jump a little bit farther. Toads are a little bit shorter to the ground. And then we have Caudata. These are your salamanders and your axolotls, you can see in the picture. Over 800 species. Cauda again means tail. Okay, so they have a nice long tail. They have shorter limbs, all of the same length. Okay, these guys are very different from our frogs. Our frogs had short front legs, really long hind legs. These guys have 4 legs, all of the same length. These guys are much better adapted to walking on the land and swimming in the water, and many of these guys can regenerate limbs once they're lost. And then Apoda, this is probably our least familiar order. These are your Sicilians, 200 species without feet. They don't have limbs. They're still considered tetrapods due to their developmental purposes. Look very similar to earthworms, snakes, any of those guys slithering around. Bury in the soil. And 75% of these guys are actually viviparous. That means that they have their baby developing inside their body, like we do. While most amphibians are oviparous, which means that they're laying eggs outside of their body. A gross fact is that when they're born, thank goodness this doesn't happen in humans, the young baby Sicilians eat the skin of their mother as their first meals. You can't find them here. They're going to be in tropical regions because it has to be very, very moist for them to burrow into the ground. So South and Central America, South Asia, stuff like that. All right, if we go into movement, talked a little bit about it up till this point. Amphibians have a bony endoskeleton, right? Just like we do, made of bone, and muscular limbs. Because they're low to the ground, they're not the fastest, most efficient moving tetrapods we have. As far as what they eat, they're carnivores. Most of them swallow their prey whole because they're eating small insects. Some amphibians can eat other small vertebrates if we're talking about like tiny little fish or, yeah, it's probably as far as their vertebrates will go. Slugs, snails, they'll eat other smaller amphibians. If they get really big, they can eat some mice, birds, and bats, but that would be a very, very, very large amphibian. Most amphibians have a long, flexible tongue for catching prey. We've all seen the videos growing up as kids where the tongue shoots out of the frog's mouth and it catches a fly and brings it back. The tongue of the frog is actually attached to the front of the mouth and kind of curls outward. It's not like our tongue where it's attached to the back of our throat or bottom of our jaw. Theirs is actually attached to where your lip would be, and it flips outward, collects whatever it's catching, and then flips it back in and delivers it down the throat. They do have teeth only on their upper jaw. They're not chewing teeth like ours. You can see them in the picture. They're very, very, very small, but more for just holding on to their prey so that they can swallow it. Again, most of these are swallowed whole. But again, just on their upper jaw, there's like one species that has lower jaw teeth, but for the most part, just on their upper jaw, not for chewing, just for holding on. These guys have a complete digestive tract, like many of our chordates, including mouth, esophagus, stomach, intestine, cloaca. Okay, cloaca is for excretory system. Okay, where all of your digestive contents go, urine, and for reproductive purposes. Okay, so it's like a multi-stop organ. Circulatory system, more complex than fish. Okay, they have a three-chambered heart. Remember, fish only had a two. They had one atrium and one ventricle. More complex chordates like us have a four-chambered heart that keep our oxygenated and deoxygenated blood totally separate. This is the most ideal. These guys have like a mix in between. They have two atria and one ventricle. Is that blood flows through two different circuits. A pulmonary circuit where blood is pumped, deoxygenated blood, okay, so hasn't gone to the lungs yet, from the heart to the lungs. And then you have a systemic circuit that carries blood from the lungs to the rest of the heart and then body tissues. Okay, so they have a whole separate circuit going from heart to lungs and then from heart to body tissue. We're not going to go too far into it, but there's the important thing to know is that they have a three-chambered heart. Fish have two. They're the next up with three, and then after that we go to four. These guys have many tiny blood vessels called capillaries. We have capillaries as well throughout our body. Theirs is to allow gases to diffuse through the skin and the air. So they're very, very, very close to the surface so that they can do gas exchange through their skin. Respiratory system. When amphibians are adults, they have specialized lungs. They inhale through their nostrils, little holes on top of their face. Then their lungs are basically little pouches of air sacs that they just like gulp air into these sacs. They fill up and then they're the air is pushed into the heart or to the oxygenated blood. They mostly breathe through their skin. Their lungs are very, very, very basic. Um, very thin, again, has those capillaries at the surface for diffusion of oxygen. Amphibians can breathe out carbon dioxide through their skin. Some salamanders totally don't have lungs at all and only breathe through their skin. If we go back, their lungs are very inefficient. Okay, so it's not ideal for them. Again, they only have them as adults, but even still, as adults, that kind of air gulping doesn't really work great. During their young life, right, their juvenile stage, most amphibians are going to breathe with gills. Mud puppies and axolotls also keep their gills into adulthood, but most amphibians, frogs, etc., they have gills as tadpoles, and then once they transition into their adult terrestrial life, the gills will kind of close up and you'll start developing that lung. Excretory system, okay, waste is excreted through the skin and the kidneys. Okay, that's our main as far as filtering blood, and some liquid waste can go through the kidneys. Again, don't forget you have that cloaca that also helps push things out. Nervous and sensory systems. Okay, amphibians have a more complex nervous system than fish. Okay, very actually similar functionality to ours. They have a cerebrum, which we do too, and a brainstem. Okay, your cerebrum is the big major part of the brain that deals with your thinking, and your brainstem is in charge of kind of taking care of your respiration, heart rate, and digestion without you thinking of it, right? That's not anything, we don't say, okay, I just ate my burger, digest it, please. Your body automatically does it for you. Okay, so they definitely have a cerebrum and a brainstem. They also have the cerebellum, which is what we have, which helps coordinate muscle movement and balance. As far as vision, they have really great vision for predator avoidance, except for our poor little Sicilians. Those guys are blind. Remember, they bury into the mud or the soil. These guys have tentacles on their head for sensing the underground environment. Some frogs and toads have really great night vision because you'll find them very active at night to kind of feed on the little bugs. Um, their ears are kind of just like little holes on the sides of their heads to sense vibrations. They don't hear sounds like we do, but they're more of, and that is called the tympanum. Okay, so they have great hearing, mostly vibrations. They have that middle and inner ear like we do. And then they have a larynx, which is essentially our vocal cords that help vibrate to push air out and create sound. That's why you hear them croaking or quote unquote ribbiting out and about. Okay, male frogs have what's called vocal sacs. If they expand their throat, they can actually make their sound louder, amplify their calls. This is very, very important for mating because the louder the croak of the frog, the more attracted the female will be. As far as hearing for our salamanders and Sicilians, they don't have that tympanum. They only detect vibrations. They also don't have a larynx. They're not interested in making mating calls. They produce pheromones, okay, which is just like a natural scent that attracts the females. As far as taste and smell, amphibians have what's called a Jacobson's organ between their nostrils that's used for smell, and they do have taste buds on their tongue. Um, we also will see this Jacobson's organs in other chordates, even us, which we call it something a little bit different, but their nostrils are used for both breathing and smelling. So remember, they can take in air through their nose, exhale the CO2, and then also gulp into those little lungs.